שהלכתי, לך זה לא שינה, ומיד כשחזרתי הייתה לך הרגשה שאני עוד אוהב אותך, שאני כבר שלך, ואהבת ושמחת וחשבת שרציתי להיות שם תמיד בשבילך, כי ידעתי שככה זה טוב, שלשניים יהיה יותר פשוט לאהוב, כל הדרך אני לצידך. גם אני עוד שומע וגם אני לא יודע איך עושים את זה, איך שזה לא קל לאהוב ללא תנאי. והופתענו כשבא השינוי הגדול, והבטחנו תמיד לדבר, וראינו אחרי שבועות וימים שלא קל לעמוד מול הרגל. גם אני עוד שומע וגם אני לא יודע איך עושים את זה, איך שזה לא קל לאהוב ללא תנאי. שזה לא קל לאהוב.
Good morning, everybody. Boker Tov, Shabbat Shalom. So happy to be with everyone here this morning. And happy month of Shvat. We just celebrated Rosh Chodesh Shvat 2 days ago, and Shvat is probably best known for Tu B'Shvat, the Jewish New Year's of nature and the trees. And we're actually going to be having a really fun TBT event next Sunday that involves some landscaping in the back of the property. So I'm sure there'll be more information about that. But happy month of Shvat to everybody. And we start services this morning with Moda Ani on page 186.
Lefanecha melechai vekayam moda ani lefanecha melechai vekayam yalailai moda ani
We turn our attention to page 194 in the Asher Yatzar blessing about the importance of bodily health and function. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher yatzar et ha'adam b'chachma, uvarei bo nekavim nekavim chalulim chalulim. Galui v'yadua lifnei kisei kivodecha, she'im yiftach echad mehem, o yistam echad mehem, I efshar lehitkayem, ul'amod lefanecha. Baruch atah Adonai, Rofei kol basar umafli la'asot. Praise to you, Adonai our God, sovereign of the universe, who formed the human body with skill, creating the body's many pathways and openings. It is well known before your throne of glory that if one of them be wrongly opened or closed, it would be impossible to endure and stand before you. Blessed are you, Adonai, who heals all flesh, working wondrously. We turn the page for Elohai Neshama.
נשמה שנתת בי, טהורה היא, אלוהי, הנשמה שנתת בי, טהורה היא, אתה בראת, אתה יצרת, אתה נפחת בי, ואתה משמרה בקרבי, ואתה עתיד לדלה ממני ולחזירה בלעתיד לבוא. כל זמן שהנשמה בקרבי, מודה אני לפניך. כל זמן שהנשמה בקרבי, מודה אני לפניך. אדוני אלוהי ואלוהי אבותיי, אדוני אלוהי ואלוהי אמותיי, ריבון כל המעשים, אדון כל הנשמות, ריבון כל המעשים, אדון כל הנשמות, אלוהי, נשמה שנתת בי, טהורה היא, אלוהי, נשמה שנתת בי, טהורה היא.
We turn to page 198, focusing on each and every miracle that allows us to appreciate the world in the way that we are able.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has given the mind the ability to distinguish day from night. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who opens the eyes of the blind. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who frees the captive. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who lifts up the fallen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who stretches the earth over the waters. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who strengthens our steps. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, malbish arumim, amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hanoten laya'ef koach, amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hama'avir shena me'enai utnuma me'afapai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani b'tzelem Elohim, amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani bat chorin, amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani Yisrael, amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Ozeh Yisrael bigvura, amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Oter Yisrael b'tifara, amen.
Amen. Focusing on the central importance that Judaism has for education and learning, we turn to page 204 for the blessing of Torah learning. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. O Adonai our God, let the words of Torah be sweet in our mouths and the mouths of your people Israel, so that we, our descendants, and the descendants of all your people Israel, may know you by studying your Torah for its own sake. Baruch atah Adonai hamelamed Torah le'amo Yisrael. These are the things that are limitless, of which a person enjoys the fruit of the world, while the principle remains in the world to come. They are honoring one's father and mother, engaging in deeds of compassion, arriving early for study morning and evening, dealing graciously with guests, visiting the sick, providing for the wedding couple, accompanying the dead for burial, being devoted in prayer, and making peace among people. But the Torah of study encompasses them all. We turn to page 212 for the blessings of Pezukei de Zimra.
Baruch Shamar v'hayalam, Baruch Hu, Baruch Shemo, Baruch Hoseh v'Reshit, Baruch Omer v'Hoseh, Baruch Gazer u'Mekayem, Baruch Merachem al haaretz, Baruch Merachem al habriot, Baruch Meshalem Zachar Tov Lireach, Baruch Chai La'ad v'Kayam Lanetzach, Baruch Podeh u'Matzil, Baruch Hu, Baruch Shemo, Baruch atah Adonai melech mehulah batishbachot, Baruch atah Adonai melech mehulah batishbachot.
Page 214 for Mizmor Shir.
Mizmor Shir leyom HaShabbat, Mizmor Shir leyom HaShabbat, Mizmor Shir leyom HaShabbat, ay lay 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 lay. Mizmor Shir leyom HaShabbat, Mizmor Shir leyom HaShabbat, Mizmor Shir leyom HaShabbat, yalay lay 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 lay. Tov lehodot l'Adonai ולזמר לשמך עליון, להגיד בבוקר חסדך ואמונתך בלילות, לעשות השבת, מזמור שיר ליום השבת, מזמור שיר ליום השבת,
Reflecting on how fortunate we are to be dwelling in such a beautiful community, such a beautiful metaphorical house, we turn to page 215 for Ashrei.
Sela, Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha, Od Yalelucha Sela, Ashrei, Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha, Od Yalelu, Od Yalelucha Sela, Ashrei Yoshvei יושבי ביתך, עוד יעללוך סלע, אשרי, אשרי יושבי ביתך, עוד יעללו, עוד יעללוך סלע.
תהילה לדביר ממך, אלוהי המלך ובשמך לעולם ועד.
בכל ימיו יחכה, והללה שמך לעולם ועד.
גדול אדוני ומהולל מאוד, ולתולתו אין חקר.
דור לדור ישבח מעשיך, וגבורותיך יגידו.
הדר כבוד הודך, ודברי נפלאותיך עשיך.
ועזוז נורותיך יאמרו, וגדולתך אספרנה.
זכר רבתוך יביעו, וצדקך ירננו.
חנון ורחום אדוני, ערך אפיים וגדול חסד.
טוב אדוני לעכל, ורחמיו על כל מעשיו.
יודוך אדוני כל מעשיך, וחסידיך יברכוך.
כבוד מלכותך יאמרו, וגבורתך ידברו.
להודיע לבני האדם גבורותיו, וכבוד הדר מלכותו.
מלכותך מלכות כל העמים, ומשלתך בכל דור ודור.
סומך אדוני לכל הנופלים, וזוקף לכל הכפופים.
הנה כל אליך יסברו, ואתה נותן להם את אכלם בעתו.
פותח את ידיך, ומשביע לכל חי רצון.
צדיק אדוני בכל דרכיו, וחסיד בכל מעשיו.
קרוב אדוני לכל קוראיו, לכל אשר יקראוהו באמת.
רצון יריב יעשה, ואת שבתם ישמע ויושיעם.
שומר אדוני את כל אוהביו, ואת כל הרשעים ישמיד.
תהילת אדוני ידבר פיו, ויברך כל בשר שם קדשו לעולם ועד.
ואנחנו נברך יה, מעתה ועד עולם, הללויה.
Page 218.
הללו אל בקודשו, הללו ברקיע עוזו, הללו בגבורותיו, הללו קרוב כולו, כל הנשמה תהלליה, הללו הללויה, כל הנשמה תהלליה, הללו הללויה, הללו בתקע שופר, הללו בנבל וכינור, הללו בטוב ומחול, הללו במיני ועוגה, כל הנשמה תהלליה, הללו הללויה, כל הנשמה תהלליה, הללו הללויה, הללו בציץ לשמה, הללו בציצלי תרועה, הללו, בציצלי שמה, הללו, בציצלי תרועה, כל הנשמה תהלליה, הללו, הללויה, כל הנשמה תהלליה, הללו, הללויה.
Nishmat kol chai tivarech et shemcha Adonai Eloheinu v'ruach kol basar tifa'er v'tiramem zecharecha malkeinu tamid. Let the soul of everything alive bless your name, Adonai our God, and the spirit of all flesh glorify and exalt your name forever. O sovereign, transcending space and time, you alone are God. We have no sovereign besides you, God of the first and the last, God of all creatures, master of all generations, who is praised in multitudes of praises, who guides the world with abundant loving kindness, and all creatures with mercy. Adonai neither slumbers nor sleeps. God awakens the sleeping, arouses those who slumber, gives speech to the mute. And God loosens the bonds of captives. God supports the fallen and strengthens those who are bent over. You alone do we acknowledge. Ilufinu on page 220.
Ilufinu male shira kayam uleshonenu rinam veyadenu frosot knishrei shamayim veraglenu kalot kayalot. Ilufinu male shira kayam uleshonenu rinam veyadenu frosot knishrei shamayim veraglenu kalot kayalot. En anachnu maspikim lehodot lecha ulevarech et shimcha makeinu melech malchei amlachim melech malchei amlachim. Ilufinu male shira kayam uleshonenu rina veyadenu frosot knishrei shamayim veraglenu kalot kayalot.
For every mouth will acknowledge you, and every tongue pledge homage to you. Every knee bend in your presence, every upright person shall bow before you. Every heart will revere you, and every innermost thought will sing to your name. And David said, let all my bones exclaim, who is like you, Adonai? As David continued, bless Adonai, O my soul, and let my inner being praise your holy name. Page 222 for Shochen Ad.
שוכן עד מרום וקדוש שמו, וכתוב רננו צדיקים באדוני, לישרים נאווה תהילה, בפי ישרים תתהלל, ובדברי צדיקים תתברך, ובלשון חסידים תתרומם, ובקרב קדושים תתקדש. ובמקלות ריבות עמך בית ישראל, ברינה יתפאר שמך מלכנו, בכל דור ודור. ישתבח שמך לעד מלכנו, האל המלך הגדול והקדוש בשמיים ובארץ. כי לך נאה אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ואמותינו, שהוא שפכה לב זמרה, עוז ממשלה נצח גדולה גבורה, תהילה ותפארת, קדושה ומלכות, ברכות והודעות, מעתה ועד עולם. ברוך אתה אדוני, אל מלך גדול בתשבחות, אל ההודעות אדון הנפלאות, הבוחר בשירי זמרה, מלך מלכי העולמים. Chetzi Kaddish on page 224. Yitkadash Shemei Rabbah Be'almadi v'rachirutei v'yamlich malchutei B'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei techol Beit Yisrael Ba'agala u'v'zman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam ulal me'almaya Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'al v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yit'ale v'yithalal Shemei kodesha b'richu le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata Tushbechata v'nechemata tamiran be'alma v'imeru Amen.
We rise for Baruch Hu on page 226.
Baruch Hu et Adonai hamevorach.
Baruch Adonai HaMevarach Leolam Va'ed. We continue on page 228. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, yotzer or uvarech choshech, oseh shalom uvarei et hakol. In mercy you illuminate the world and those who live upon it. In your goodness you daily renew creation. How numerous are your works, Adonai. In wisdom you form them all, filling the earth with your creatures. Be praised, Adonai our God, for the excellent work of your hands. And for the lights you created, may they glorify you. Shine a new light upon Zion, that we all may swiftly merit its radiance. Baruch atah Adonai, Yotzer HaMe'orot. We continue with Ahava Rabbah, the chapter of great love on page 230. And we take a few seconds to each of us introspect on one small thing we might do in the coming days or the coming weeks to increase the amount of love we have just a little bit. Ahava Rabbah Avtanu Adonai Eloheinu Chemla Gadola V'yetera Chemlata Aleinu Ba'avor Avotenu V'imotenu Shebatchu B'cha V'tamidem Chukei Chaim Ken Techanenu Tamidenu Hamerachem Rachem Aleinu V'tein B'libenu Lahavin Ulahaskil Ulishmoa Ulilmod Ulilamed Ulishmor Ulasot Ulakayim Et Kol Divrei Talmud Toratecha Behava. Gather us in peace from the four corners of the earth, and lead us upright to our land. For you, O God, work wonders. You chose us. Truly, you drew near to us, your great name, that we might acknowledge you, declaring you one in love. Baruch atah Adonai, habocher ba'amo Yisrael b'yahava. We turn the page for Shema.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. We continue on page 234 with Ve'ahavta. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha bechol levavcha ubechol nafshecha ubechol me'odecha ve'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi metzavecha hayom alevavecha ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם נאות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. We continue in English in the middle of page 236. Adonai said to Moses as follows, "Speak to the Israelite people and instruct them to make for themselves fringes on the corners of their garments throughout the ages. Let them attach a cord of blue to the fringe at each corner. That shall be your fringe. Look at it and recall all the commandments of Adonai and observe them, so that you do not follow your heart and eyes in your lustful urge. למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אמת.
Adonai Elohechem Emet. V'yatzi v'ahu v'chavi v'nora v'adir v'tov v'yafeh hadavar hazeh aleinu li'olam va'ed. Emet Elohei olam makenu tzur Yaakov magen yishenu. Lador v'dor hu kayam u'shmo kayam. U'kiso nachon u'malchutro v'emunato le'ad kayamet. U'dvarav chayim v'kayamim ne'amanim v'nachmadim la'ad olamei olamim. Mimitzrayim ge'altanu Adonai Eloheinu u'mibeit avadim peditanu. Al zot shibuchu ahuvim v'romamu el v'natnu yedidim zmira shira v'tishbacho brachot v'hodaot lemelach el chai v'kayam ram v'nisa gadol v'nora mashbil ge'im magbia shefalim motzi asirim ufode anavim v'ozer dalim v'one le'amo be'et shavatam elav tihilat elyon baruch hu u'mevarach Moshe u'Miriam u'v'nei Yisrael lacha anushira b'simcha rabba v'amru kulam. Page 240 for Micha Mocha. שירה חדשה, שיבחו גאולים לשמך על שפת הים, יחד כולם הודו והמליכו ואמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. צור ישראל קומה בעזרת ישראל ובתכינו יהודה וישראל. צור ישראל קומה בעזרת ישראל ובתכינו ממך יהודה וישראל. עלינו אדוני צבאות שמו קדוש ישראל. ברוך אתה We remain standing for the Amidah on page 242.
Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi yagid tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah. האל הגדול, הגיבור והנורא, אל חסדים טובים וקונה הכל וזוכה חסדי אבות ואימהות ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל אתה רב להושיע. משיב הרוח ומרעיד הגשם, מחכה חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים. סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומדו מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה. ונאמן אתה לחיות הכל, ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי הכל. נקדיש את שמך בעולם, כשם שמקדישים בו טוב בשמי מרום, ככתוב על יד נביאך, וקרא זה ואמר, קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוך כל הארץ כבודו. אדיר אדירנו אדוני אדוננו, מאדיר שמך בכל הארץ, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. אחד הוא אלוהינו, הוא אבינו, הוא מלכנו, הוא מושיענו והוא ישמיענו, ברחמיו לעיני כל חי. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהי ציון לדור ודור. הללויה. לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש, ושבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש. יהי זכרו במלכות החשוב שם וכל העונה, כמקדשי שביעי כולם יספרו בטובך. והשביעי רצית בו וקידשת, חמדת ים ידו קראת, שכם מעשה בראשית. We close the Amidah with Oseh Shalom on the bottom of page 260. Oseh Shalom, Shalom bimromav, Hu yaseh Shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael ve'yimeru amen. Oseh Shalom, Shalom bimromav, Hu yaseh Shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael ve'yimeru amen. Hu yaseh Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael amen. Oseh Shalom, Shalom bimromav, Hu yaseh Shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael ve'yimeru amen. Ve'al kol Yisrael amen.
Amen. So this week is Parsha Va'era, where we get the first 7 of the 10 plagues. And there's a question that deeply bothers a lot of the medieval commentators, and a question that I think, if we think about these plagues for long enough, should probably bother everybody, which is, at a certain point, why were all of the Egyptians still getting punished for Pharaoh's unwillingness to allow the Israelites to leave? Perhaps in the beginning it makes sense. Perhaps, as some rabbis attempt to answer, the entire Egyptian empire, the entire Egyptian nation was somewhat complicit in turning the Israelites into slaves. Perhaps, as other rabbis attempt to offer, they gained economically from the resources. And so, they didn't want to protest, or they actually really liked the fact that the Israelites were slaves. But at a certain point in the Torah portion, as the plagues keep on coming, after the Nile turns to blood, after frogs spread out throughout the land, and as the plagues keep getting worse, and as Pharaoh keeps being on the cusp of letting the Jews go, only to have his heart hardened, one has to think that at a certain point, okay, maybe this is an issue that has to be taken up between maybe Moses, God, and Pharaoh, but why do all of the Egyptians need to bear the brunt? And this is a question that really does bother many Jewish commentators. And as stated before, some of them attempt to say that the entire Egyptian nation was complicit. A lot of them focus on the wording from last week's Torah portion. Last week's Torah portion, the first book of the book of Exodus, the first section of the book of Exodus, where the Israelite people are settling in the land of Egypt. And a lot of the wording that's used there is pluralistic language. It says the Egyptian empire said, let us deal wisely with them. Let us enslave these people. And so these medieval commentators say, you see, it was the entire Egyptian empire. It had nothing to do with just their leader, but really the leader was just reflecting the characteristics of the rest of the people. Other 19th century rabbis, more interestingly enough, attempt to anachronistically portray ancient Egypt as a type of democracy. And so a lot of them envision a scenario in ancient Egypt where every couple of years, people would quite literally, in these rabbis' minds, go to the polls. They would look at their elected leaders, and Pharaoh would come each and every year and say, elect me. Look at how great it's been. We have this entire Israelite nation working for us. And the people year after year would say, well, yeah, he has a point. It is pretty nice that all of our bricks and all of everything is made by this other nation? Whatever individual answer one focuses on here, they all converge on a crucial theme, and one that I think is even more important in the light of this being MLK weekend, but an important theme, I think, really for any day of the year. And that's the idea of collective responsibility. One thing that we know when it comes to the Torah is that the Torah sets an extremely high bar for collective responsibility. And one of the constant themes that go throughout the Hebrew Bible and even later Jewish sources is the interdependence that not just all Jews and Israelites have for each other, but really all human beings have for one another. And this is even taken to some extremes in the Hebrew Bible. There's a fascinating story towards the beginning of the book of Yehoshua, the book of Joshua, where one man, a man named Achan, decides to take from the riches of a city that the Israelites had just conquered in the land of Canaan. And before the war, God and Joshua were very specific, and they said, hey, we're going to go conquer the city. Please don't touch any of the stuff. And we can imagine 99.99% of the Israelites listened. And one guy named Achan decided that he would take some stuff. And the Hebrew Bible says in the next war that the Israelites had a few days later, God allowed them to lose the war. God allowed the enemy to prevail over just for the sin of one person that did it covertly. Because as the commentators say, the fact that there would be one person in a community that would be willing to commit an unethical act in some way makes the entire community complicit. So there's an irony here, because a lot of moral theorists and a lot of Bible critics really fault the Torah and the Hebrew Bible for this type of theology. A lot of them say, that collective responsibility, or framed in a slightly different way, collective punishment, is not a direction that we really want our society to be headed in. We don't want an entire community or an entire people to be punished for the actions of other people in that community. We can all understand and see how that leads to a very slippery slope. But the other side of the coin is that the idea of collective responsibility as a cornerstone of biblical theology has actually been popping up to some extent more and more in the everyday nature of our world. One of the major themes of the last 10 or 11 months is really the importance of every single individual action when it comes to keeping the community safe. And it's not necessarily a philosophical or theological thing. It's not even necessarily something that's fair, but something that we've understood about the nature of the world is that sadly, or perhaps for good, the actions of one person in a community can have drastic effects, whether positive or negative, on those around them. And one of the ideas, I think one of the important ideas that come out under the banner of collective responsibility is that of the bystander, that of the people who aren't in the mainstream, the people who aren't necessarily leaders, people who, if we could think about historic tragedies, people who aren't even necessarily the quote unquote bad guys, but people that sit around and watch as something bad happens in a society, and they themselves decide that they're going to sit out on the sidelines. They decide that perhaps, it's not their place, or for a whole variety of other reasons, they don't want to go in the streets and protest. And last night we talked a little bit about Rabbi Joachim Prinz, the German-born rabbi who was expelled from Berlin when the Nazis rose to power, who then dedicated the rest of his life to civil rights. And we talked about the speech that he gave in the March on Washington and how he reflects on these foundational Jewish values. But before he actually gets into Jewish values, he starts his speech about a specific insight that he had, that actually an insight that we see among a lot of people that survived the Holocaust, about the insight of what actually went wrong in Germany. And so Rabbi Prinz said on the March on Washington, he said, when I was the rabbi of the Jewish community in Berlin, I learned many things. The most important thing I learned under those tragic circumstances was that bigotry and hatred are not the most urgent problem. The most urgent, the most disgraceful, the most shameful and the most tragic problem is silence. A great people, which had created a great civilization, had become a nation of silent onlookers. They remained silent in the face of hate, in the face of brutality, and in the face of mass murder. America must not become a nation of onlookers. America must not remain silent. Not merely Black America, but all of America. It must speak up and act. This theme, this idea of the bystander, and that in a society, what's happening is somewhat either the detriment or merit of the people there, is one that's reflected in a number of Jewish writers. We can talk about Hannah Arendt, the great 20th century political theorist, a Holocaust survivor who dedicated the rest of her life to really understanding sociology and politics, and just how, again, this fundamental question that many survivors had: how could a country such as Germany have gone from, again, one of the centers of the 20th century progressive civilization in just 10 years into what we know happened? Hannah Arendt coined the term the banality of evil, the idea that real evil isn't always necessarily explicit. It's not the 0.1% of people that might be explicitly spreading evilness, but rather the rest of the population, the rest of society. This idea is also reflected in another Jewish civil rights icon, Abraham Joshua Heschel, who wrote a multiplicity of essays about this. But I wanted to conclude with a statement from the Talmud, because I feel like this is, to some extent, an unrealistically high moral expectation on this community. I was talking with a lot of college students this week, and we were going over some of these sources, and we discussed a previous piece of Talmud that says that any individual that has the ability to protest against the transgressions of one's community is punished for those sins. And then the Talmud, in typical Talmudic fashion, continues with bigger and bigger concentric circles until the Talmud concludes anybody who has the ability to protest against the sins of the entire world and doesn't is punished for the sins of the world. And a lot of students, and including myself, look at that and I think that's beautiful. This is a beautiful message. And it's also very unrealistic to think that any one of us has the power ourselves to protest the injustices in the world. There would be quite literally no end to it, sadly. But there's a very famous Mishnah, and one that is really one of my favorite pieces of rabbinic literature. And it's so short and simple. And it's said by the rabbinic sage Rabbi Tarfon. And Rabbi Tarfon used to say, "It is not your duty to finish the work. So don't think you have to do everything, but neither are you at liberty to neglect it." Shabbat Shalom. Before we read Torah reading, I'll ask Mark Silverstein to be the Gabbai.
Okay. Yamdu. Aliyah Rishon, Moshe ben Aaron Yafa, Mike Kokos, and our reader is Daphna Guterman.
Baruch Hu Adonai Hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai Mevorach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Mevorach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim V'natan Lanu Et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen.
Amen. וידבר אלוהים אל משה, ויאמר אליו אני אדוני, וארא אל אברהם, אל יצחק ואל יעקב ואל שדי, ושמי אדוני לא נודעתי להם. ויאמר הקימותי את בריתי איתם, לתת להם את ארץ כנען, את ארץ מגוריהם, אשר גרו בה.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת וחיי עולם נטע בתוכנו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
אמן.
Yasher Koach. Yam Tu Aliyah Sheni Bila Yocheved Bat Yitzhak Baruch V'Pesach Gela Halevi. Judy Robbins, and our reader is Nitza Hennig.
Baruch hu et Adonai hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai mevarach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hamvarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
וגם אני שמעתי את נקד בני ישראל, אשר מצרים מעבידים אותם, ואזכור את בריתי. לכן אמור לבני ישראל, אני אדוני, והוצאתי אותם מתחת סבלת מצרים, והצלתי אתכם מעבודתם, וגאלתי אתכם בזרוע נטויה ובמשפטים גדולים.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam, asher natan lanu Torat emet, v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Yasher Koach. Yam Tu Aliyah Shishi, Avraham ben Avraham, Esther Chaya bat Moshe Nuben V'Pinyana, Tony Cipriano, and Esther Amsterdam, and our reader is Mark Filowitz.
Baruch hu et Adonai hamevarach.
Baruch Adonai mevarach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hamevarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. V'lakachti etchem li la'am, v'yiti lachem le'elohim, v'yateh, ki ani Adonai Elohechem, hamotzi ha'etchem, mitachat slivlot Mitzrayim, v'cheviti etchem el aretz, asher nosati et yadi lachet ota l'Abraham li'Yitzhak li'Yaakov v'natati otam lachem morasani Adonai v'yidaber Moshe Cain el bnei Yisrael v'lo shamu el Moshe mikotze ruach u'me'avodah kasha.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, בחיי עולם נתן בתוכנו, ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen.
Amen. Yasher Koach. Yom Tov, the Maftir. Aharon Moshe ben Abraham Verita. Yours truly, Mark Silverstein, and our reader is Gabriel Newman. Baruch hu Adonai Hambarach.
Baruch Adonai mevarach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hambarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. ויצא משה מעם פרעה את העיר, ויפרוס כפיו אל אדוני, ויחדלו הקולות והברד, ומטר לא ניתח עד ארצה. וירא פרעה כי חדל המטר והברד והקולות, ויוסף לחתו, ויכבד ליבו הוא ועבדיו, ויחזק לב פרעה ולא שילח את בני ישראל כאשר דיבר אדוני ביד משה.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam, asher natan lanu Torat emet, v'chayei olam notah b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
We turn to page 370 for the Mishuberach for everybody who had an Aliyah and read the Torah. Mishuberach avotenu v'imotenu, Abraham, Yitzchak, v'Yakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, v'Leah, hu yivarech et kol ha'olim ba'avor she'oleh lekavod hamakom lichvod ha'Torah b'schar zeh hakadosh baruch hu yishmarehu v'yatzilehu mikol tzara utzuka mikol nega umachla v'yishlach bracha v'hatzlacha b'chol masei yadav im kol Israel v'namar amen. We turn our attention to the Mishuberach for healing. And once again, we have in mind anybody this Shabbat that's in need of any type of healing, again, be it due to COVID or any other type of physical illness, any mental or spiritual illness, any type of addiction. Mi sheberach avotenu v'imotenu, Abraham, Yitzchak, v'Yakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, v'Leah, hu yivarech et hacholim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu yimalei rachamim aleihem, lahachmilam u'lefuatam, u'lahachzikam v'yishlach lehem mehera refuah, refuah shlema min hashamayim, refuat hanefesh v'refuat haguf, hashta ba'agla u'bizman kariv, v'namar amen. We turn to page 598 for the Mourner's Kaddish, and we keep in mind anybody in our community that's saying Kaddish this Shabbat, whether that's during the Shiva period, the Shloshim period, or a Yartzeit. Please join us for Mourner's Kaddish on page 598.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, בעלמא דברך חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם ולעולמי עלמיה, יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי דקודשה בריחו. לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, תאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלום מן שמיים, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן.
Amen. Services conclude with Ein Kelohenu.
Give me like 2 seconds to sit down. Thank you for your patience. We will now conclude our Shacharit Shel Shabbat service with Ein Kelohenu. I almost forgot to turn to the page. I got this. Here we are. Now I'm ready. Ein Kelohenu, Ein Kadonenu, Ein Kemakenu, Ein Kemoshienu. Non como nuestro Dios, non como nuestro Señor, non como nuestro Rey, non como nuestro Salvador. Mi Elohenu, mi Adonenu, mi Kemakenu, mi Kemoshienu. ¿Quién como nuestro Dios? ¿Quién como nuestro Señor? ¿Quién como nuestro Rey? ¿Quién como nuestro Salvador? No del Elohenu, no del Adonenu, no del Emakenu, no del Moshienu. Lo oremos a nuestro Dios, lo oremos a nuestro Señor, lo oremos a nuestro Rey, lo oremos a nuestro Salvador. Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu. Bendito nuestro Dios, bendito nuestro Señor, bendito nuestro Rey, bendito nuestro Salvador. Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu. Tú sos nuestro Dios, tú sos nuestro Señor, tú sos nuestro Rey, tú sos nuestro Salvador. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us.